The structure that Gregor Hoffman built on his Montana homestead in 1917 looked like someone had stacked 3 log cabins on top of each other and called it architecture. While every other settler in the Bitterroot Valley had constructed single-story cabins with large horizontal footprints, Gregor had built upward instead of outward. His dwelling was 12 feet by 12 feet at the base, but rose 3 full stories high, 36 feet from ground to roof peak, a tower, a vertical cabin, a structure so unusual that travelers on the road would stop just to stare at it and wonder what madness had possessed the builder. "That's not a cabin," said James Peterson, Gregor's neighbor, whose conventional cabin sat on a gentle slope half a mile away. "That's a lighthouse without the light. Or maybe a silo someone tried to live in. What were you thinking?" Gregor was on the roof of his tower, installing the final section of stovepipe that would connect all 3 floors. He didn't pause in his work. "I was thinking about heat rising, about surface area to volume ratios, about using physics instead of fighting it." "Physics? Gregor, you've built a 3-story cabin in Montana. That's not physics. That's insanity. How are you going to heat 3 floors? The top floor will be boiling while the bottom floor freezes. Everyone knows heat rises. You've designed a structure that guarantees you'll be uncomfortable no matter which floor you're on." "Heat rises, yes. This is exactly why tower design works. I don't fight the rising heat. I use it. The heat travels up naturally. I live on the floors where the temperature is right. In deep winter, I live on the top floor where the warmest air is. In moderate weather, I live on the middle floor. The bottom floor stays cool, and I use it for storage." "You built 3 floors just so you could choose which one to live on? Why not build 1 floor and heat it properly?" 3 floors, 1 heater. The stove is on the ground floor. It heats the bottom floor. The hot air rises through the open stairwell and heats the middle floor. The hottest air continues rising and heats the top floor. 1 stove, 3 heated spaces. And the tower shape has much less surface area than a single-story cabin with the same interior volume. Less surface area means less heat loss. More efficient. James shook his head slowly. "I don't understand a word of that. What I do understand is that you've built the strangest cabin in Montana. When winter comes, you're going to realize that heat doesn't work the way you think it does. You'll be miserable. When winter comes, I'll be warmer than you are, using less wood. You want to make a wager. A wager on who freezes less?" "That's dark, Gregor, but sure. If your tower cabin keeps you warmer than my regular cabin while using less wood, I'll admit you were right. If you're colder than me or if you use more wood, you admit this tower idea was a mistake." "Agreed. We measure temperatures. We measure wood consumption. The coldest week of winter, the loser admits error publicly." They shook hands on it. James was confident. Gregor had built something weird and impractical. Reality would prove it. Gregor was equally confident. He'd done the calculations. He understood the geometry. His tower would outperform conventional cabins dramatically. Other neighbors had similar reactions to James. The consensus was clear. Gregor had made a spectacular mistake. The tower cabin was too tall, too narrow, too strange. It would be impossible to heat. It would be uncomfortable. It would prove that deviation from conventional cabin design was foolish. Some people felt sorry for Gregor. The poor German immigrant didn't understand American building practices. Others were amused. This would be an entertaining failure to watch. A few were annoyed. Gregor's tower was visible from miles away. It was an eyesore, a statement of stubborn stupidity that marred the valley's appearance. Gregor ignored all of it. He'd grown up in the Harz Mountains of Germany, in a region where winter was long and fuel was precious. His family had lived in a tall, narrow house with 5 floors. Generations of the same family occupying different floors. The heating system was brilliantly efficient. A single masonry stove on the ground floor heated the entire structure through natural convection and careful design. The shape of the house, vertical rather than sprawling, minimized heat loss while maximizing interior space. It was proven technology, centuries old. Gregor was simply applying that knowledge to a Montana homestead. The construction had taken most of the summer of 1917. The foundation was deep and solid. Stone piers extending 4 feet into the ground, supporting massive sill logs. The structure would be tall. It needed a foundation that could support the weight without settling. The first floor was 12 feet by 12 feet interior space. Walls made from 14-inch diameter logs, carefully fitted and chinked. In one corner, a large masonry heater. Not a cast iron stove, a masonry heater. Gregor had built it himself using field stone and fire brick. The heater was 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and 3 feet deep. It probably weighed 3 tons. The mass was important. The heater would store enormous amounts of heat and release it slowly. The key design feature was the flue. Instead of a straight chimney rising from the heater through the roof, Gregor had built the flue to pass through all 3 floors before exiting. The flue ran from the heater up through a corner of the first floor ceiling, through the corner of the second floor, through the corner of the third floor, and finally through the roof. The entire 36-foot height of the structure. This flue was not a simple pipe. It was a masonry chimney built from stone and fire brick, with a 4-inch by 8-inch internal passage. The masonry mass of this chimney was substantial, perhaps 2 tons of stone running vertically through the entire structure. As hot gases rose through this chimney, they heated the masonry. The masonry radiated heat into each floor it passed through. It was a heat distribution system. The stairwell connecting the floors was also critical. It was not enclosed, it was completely open. A central well running from the first floor to the third floor ceiling. Hot air from the first floor could rise freely through this open stairwell, carrying heat to the upper floors. The stairwell also featured a unique design element. Gregor had built adjustable wooden shutters at each floor level. These shutters could be opened or closed to control airflow. Want more heat on the second floor? Open the shutters between first and second. Close the shutters between second and third. The heat would concentrate on the second floor. Want maximum heat on the third floor? Open all shutters. The heat would rise to the top. The second floor was identical in size to the first. 12 by 12 interior space, but it had no heating source. Just the masonry chimney passing through one corner, radiating heat. And the open stairwell in the center, allowing hot air to rise from below. The third floor was also 12 by 12. Again, no heating source. Just the chimney and the stairwell. This floor had windows on all 4 sides. Small windows, but positioned to allow maximum sunlight in winter when the sun angle was low. The windows could be shuttered closed for insulation or opened for light and view. The roof was steeply pitched. Snow would slide off rather than accumulating. The pitch also created a small attic space above the third floor. This attic was accessible and could be used for storage. But more importantly, it provided an additional insulating airspace between the third floor ceiling and the roof. The total interior volume of the 3 floors was approximately 518 cubic feet per floor, or about 1,554 cubic feet total. A single-story cabin of equivalent volume would need to be 22 feet by 22 feet. That's 484 square feet of floor area. Gregor's tower had 144 square feet of floor area per level, or 432 square feet total horizontal surface. But here's the key: exterior surface area. A single-story cabin 22 by 22 with 8-foot walls has approximately 2,112 square feet of exterior surface. Walls plus roof plus floor. Gregor's tower, with its 12 by 12 footprint and 3 stories, has approximately 1,520 square feet of exterior surface. For the same interior volume, the tower has 28% less exterior surface area. Less surface area means less area through which heat can escape. The geometry is more efficient. The surface area to volume ratio is better. This is basic physics. Spheres have the best ratio. Cubes are second best. Tall, narrow rectangles are better than short, wide rectangles. Gregor had built as close to a cube as practical carpentry allowed. The result was a structure that would lose less heat per unit of interior volume than any conventional cabin design. But neighbors didn't understand surface area to volume ratios. They just saw a weird tall cabin and assumed it would fail. The first test came in late October when the temperature dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Gregor lit his masonry heater. Not a quick hot fire. A sustained moderate fire maintained for 4 hours. The masonry absorbed heat slowly. After 4 hours, the heater was warm to the touch throughout its mass. The first floor was comfortable, 65 degrees. Gregor closed the adjustable shutters on the stairwell to concentrate heat on the first floor. Over the next 12 hours, with no active fire, the first floor stayed at 60 to 62 degrees. The masonry heater released stored heat. The tight construction and excellent geometry retained it, but Gregor wanted to test the heat distribution. He opened all the stairwell shutters and fired the heater again. Hot fire for 5 hours. The heater absorbed massive amounts of heat. Then he let the fire go out completely. He monitored temperatures on all 3 floors. First floor, 68 degrees immediately after firing. 64 degrees 12 hours later. Second floor, 65 degrees immediately after firing. 62 degrees 12 hours later. Third floor, 72 degrees immediately after firing. 68 degrees 12 hours later. The third floor was the warmest. Just as Gregor had designed it to be, the hottest air rose to the top. The masonry chimney passing through each floor radiated heat at each level. But the highest concentration of heat was at the top. Perfect. In deep winter, he would live on the third floor. It would be the warmest space. In moderate weather, he could live on the second floor. In summer, he could live on the first floor where it would be coolest. One structure, 3 different thermal zones. Gregor could choose based on outside conditions. James Peterson visited a week later. "How's the tower working?" "Better than expected." "Want to see?" Gregor showed James through all 3 floors, explained the masonry heater, demonstrated the adjustable shutters, showed the temperature differences between floors. James was impressed but still skeptical. "This is mild weather. 20 degrees is nothing. Wait until it's -30 and the wind is blowing." November brought colder temperatures. Gregor adjusted his firing schedule. 2 fires per day, morning and evening. Each fire burned for 4 to 5 hours. The masonry heater stored the heat. The tower stayed warm around the clock. The third floor remained at 68 to 72 degrees consistently. Gregor set up his living space on the third floor. Sleeping area, small work table, storage, everything he needed in that one warm room. The second floor he used for additional storage and as a transitional space. The first floor was for the heater and any activities that required being near the heat source. His wood consumption was approximately 1/2 cord per week. James was burning 1 full cord per week in his conventional cabin and achieving interior temperatures of 60 to 62 degrees. Gregor was warmer and using half the wood, but the real test was still coming. December 1917 brought severe cold to Montana. On December 14th, the temperature dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. On December 15th, -28 degrees. On December 16th, -35 degrees. The cold settled in. For 2 weeks, the temperature never rose above -10 degrees. Wood stoves across the valley burned constantly. People burned wood at unsustainable rates. Cabins struggled to stay above 50 degrees. The cold was overwhelming conventional heating. James was burning 2 cords per week, 2 full cords, and his cabin was averaging 52 to 55 degrees. He wore heavy clothing indoors. He never felt truly warm. On December 20th, James made the difficult journey through deep snow to Gregor's tower. He wanted to check on his neighbor, and he was curious whether the tower was performing as Gregor had claimed. He arrived and knocked on the first floor door. Gregor called down from above, "I'm on the third floor. Come up." James climbed the open stairwell. The temperature increased noticeably with each step. First floor was perhaps 58 degrees, comfortable but not warm. Second floor was 64 degrees, noticeably warmer. Third floor was 73 degrees. Actually warm. James stood on the third floor, feeling the warmth, looking around in disbelief. It's 73 degrees in here. 73. Outside is minus 35. That's a 108-degree temperature difference. Gregor was sitting at his table working on tanning a fur. He was wearing normal indoor clothing. No coat, no hat. The system works as designed. One firing this morning, one this evening. The masonry heater stores enormous heat. The tower geometry retains it efficiently. The third floor captures all the rising warmth. How much wood are you burning? About 1 cord per week right now, maybe slightly more in this extreme cold. James was burning 2 cords per week and was colder. Gregor was using half the wood and was 20 degrees warmer. The difference was staggering. I've lost the wager. Your tower is warmer than my cabin. You're using less wood. I don't understand how this is possible, but the evidence is undeniable. The geometry, the surface area to volume ratio, the masonry thermal mass, the heat stratification used intelligently instead of fought against. All working together. James looked around the warm third-floor space. Can you help me build something like this? We can modify your cabin, not into a tower, but we can improve the geometry and add thermal mass. It will help. Not as much as building from scratch with tower design, but it will help. Anything to stop burning 2 cords a week while freezing. The story spread rapidly through the valley. The German with the tower cabin. His structure stayed warm in minus 35-degree weather. He used half the wood everyone else used. He'd won his wager against conventional design. People wanted to know how. They wanted to see it. They wanted to understand. Gregor welcomed visitors throughout January. He showed them the structure. He explained the principles, surface area to volume ratios, thermal mass storage, heat stratification, masonry, heat distribution. Not everyone understood, but those who did were converted. This wasn't crazy. This was brilliant. If you're starting to see that the shape of your dwelling matters as much as how you heat it, that geometry and physics beat brute force heating, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. We're proving that understanding principles trumps following conventions. Hit that subscribe button and join us in learning what actually works. Now let's dive into the science behind why Gregor's tower cabin was so thermally efficient. The physics of Gregor's tower cabin involved multiple principles working together synergistically. First, surface area to volume ratio. This is perhaps the most fundamental principle in thermal efficiency. Heat loss from a structure occurs through its exterior surfaces. The more surface area you have, the more area through which heat can escape. Interior volume is what you want to heat. It's the useful space. The ratio of surface area to volume determines efficiency. Smaller ratios are better. A sphere has the best ratio. For a given volume, a sphere has the minimum possible surface area. But spheres are impractical to build and live in. Cubes are the next best shape. For a given volume, a cube has less surface area than any rectangular box. Gregor's tower, at 12 by 12 by 36 feet, approximated a cube. It was taller than wide, but still close to cubic proportions. Compare this to a single-story cabin. For the same interior volume, the single-story cabin must sprawl horizontally. It has much more roof area and floor area. The tower has less roof and floor area because it stacks space vertically. The calculation is straightforward. Gregor's tower had approximately 1,520 square feet of exterior surface for 1,554 cubic feet of interior volume. Ratio: 0.98 square feet of surface per cubic foot of volume. A conventional cabin with the same volume had approximately 2,112 square feet of exterior surface. Ratio 1.36 square feet of surface per cubic foot of volume. The tower had 28% less surface area per unit volume. This meant 28% less heat loss, all else being equal. Second, thermal stratification used intelligently. Any heated space, hot air rises and cold air sinks. This is natural convection. In a conventional single-story cabin, this creates a problem. The air near the ceiling is hot. The air near the floor is cold. You live at floor level. You're in the cold zone. The heat concentrates where you don't need it. Conventional wisdom says you fight this stratification. You use fans to mix the air. You try to force hot air down from the ceiling. You waste energy fighting natural processes. Gregor's approach was different. He embraced stratification. He let hot air rise naturally. Then he lived where the hot air went, the third floor. By choosing to occupy the warmest zone, he worked with nature rather than against it. He didn't waste any energy forcing air movement. Gravity and convection did all the work for free. Third, masonry thermal mass. Gregor's 3-ton masonry heater was a heat battery. During active firing, it absorbed enormous amounts of heat. A 3-ton masonry heater heated by 200 degrees can store approximately 240,000 BTUs. That's equivalent to burning 15 pounds of wood. Once stored, this heat released slowly over many hours. The release rate depended on the temperature differential between the masonry and the air. As the masonry cooled, it radiated heat. This radiation was gentle and continuous. The masonry chimney added additional thermal mass. 2 tons of stone running vertically through the structure. This chimney also stored heat and radiated it to each floor it passed through. Total thermal mass, 5 tons. Approximately 10,000 pounds of stone storing and releasing heat. This buffered temperature swings and created stable comfort. Fourth, the open stairwell for heat distribution. The central stairwell acted as a thermal chimney. Hot air from the first floor rose naturally through this vertical shaft, distributing heat to upper floors. No fans required, no ductwork, just natural convection utilizing the vertical geometry. The adjustable shutters allowed Gregor to control distribution. Want more heat on a particular floor? Adjust the shutters. Simple, mechanical, reliable, no complexity. Fifth, the insulating air spaces. The attic above the third floor created an additional buffer zone. Heat that reached the third floor ceiling had to pass through the attic space before escaping through the roof. The attic air was warmer than outside air. This gradient reduced heat loss. Similarly, the crawl space or basement area below the first floor, if Gregor had built one, would create a buffer. The structure could be optimized with additional insulation in key areas. But even without it, the geometry was highly efficient. The mathematical analysis of heat loss is revealing. Heat loss through a surface is calculated as Q equals U times A times delta T, where Q is heat loss in BTU per hour, U is the overall heat transfer coefficient for the surface, A is surface area, and delta T is temperature difference between inside and outside. For identical U values and identical delta T values, the structure with less surface area A has less heat loss. Q. Gregor's tower had 28% less surface area than a conventional cabin of equal volume. Therefore, it had approximately 28% less heat loss. This meant he needed 28% less heating input to maintain the same interior temperature. Or equivalently, with the same heating input, he could maintain a higher interior temperature. But the efficiency gains were even better than 28% because of the thermal mass effects. The masonry stored heat during firing periods and released it during non-firing periods. This smoothed out the heating cycle. A conventional cabin with a cast iron stove had minimal thermal mass. Temperatures swung wildly, hot during firing, cold afterward. Constant firing was needed to maintain temperature. Gregor's system, with its massive thermal mass, had minimal temperature swings. The stone released heat for 12 to 16 hours after each firing. Only 2 firings per day were needed. The duty cycle was much lower. The total efficiency gain, considering both geometric efficiency and thermal mass buffering, was probably 40 to 50% compared to a conventional cabin with a cast iron stove. This explained why Gregor used half the wood James used while maintaining higher temperatures. The 47-degree temperature difference between Gregor's third floor and James's cabin during the cold snap was extraordinary. James's cabin at 55 degrees, when outside was minus 35 degrees, represented a 90-degree temperature differential. Gregor's third floor at 73 degrees, when outside was minus 35 degrees, represented a 108-degree temperature differential, 18 degrees more, 20% better performance, with half the fuel consumption. The efficiency per BTU of fuel burned was therefore about 2.4 times better, more than double the thermal performance per unit of fuel. This is the power of good design. The comfort comparison was also significant. James's cabin at 55 degrees was uncomfortable. You needed heavy clothing. You were always aware of being cold. Gregor's third floor at 73 degrees was actually comfortable. You could wear normal clothing. You could forget about the cold outside. The psychological difference between 55 and 73 degrees is enormous. One is marginal survival. The other is genuine comfort. The construction cost comparison was interesting. James had spent approximately $120 on his cabin, materials, and some hired labor. Gregor had spent approximately $180. The masonry heater required fire brick and took significant time to build. The extra height required more logs. The total construction time was about 50% longer, but the operational savings were dramatic. Gregor was using approximately 50 cords of wood per winter. James was using approximately 100 cords. The labor value of cutting, splitting, and hauling 50 extra cords is substantial, perhaps 300 to 400 hours per winter. At even a modest value for time, that's worth far more than the $60 extra construction cost. Gregor's system paid for itself in the first winter and continued providing returns every winter thereafter. The comfort value is harder to quantify, but perhaps more important. Being genuinely warm in winter, not worrying about running out of fuel, having the psychological security of knowing your dwelling is thermally efficient. These benefits are real and valuable. By February 1918, 7 families had asked Gregor to consult on modifying or building structures based on tower principles. Not everyone could build a full 3-story tower, but the principles could be adapted. Increase vertical dimension, decrease horizontal sprawl, add thermal mass, improve surface area to volume ratio. Even partial implementation helped. Gregor helped design 3 new structures that summer. One was a full 2-story tower, smaller than Gregor's but still vertically oriented. Another was a 1.5-story design with a sleeping loft. The third was a modification to an existing cabin, adding a 2nd story and improving the heating system. All 3 showed significant efficiency improvements when tested the following winter. Wood consumption dropped by 30 to 40%. Interior temperatures increased. Comfort improved. The validation was consistent. The knowledge spread gradually beyond the Bitterroot Valley. Articles appeared in local newspapers describing Gregor's unusual cabin and its performance. The story spread person to person. That German fellow who built a tower. It stays warmer than any normal cabin. Uses half the wood. By 1925, similar structures had been built in parts of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. The designs varied, but all incorporated vertical orientation and good geometry. The success rate was high. Every structure built following the principles performed well. The technology never became mainstream for familiar reasons. First, it required understanding principles that most builders didn't have. Surface area to volume ratios aren't intuitive. You had to grasp the math and physics. Most people just followed conventional cabin designs. Second, building vertically was harder than building horizontally. You needed scaffolding, You needed to work at height. You needed stronger foundations. The construction was more complex. Third, cultural resistance. Americans associated multi-story structures with cities and mansions. A homestead cabin was supposed to be single-story. Multi-story seemed pretentious or impractical. Fourth, by the 1920s and 30s, alternative heating technologies were available. Better stoves, coal furnaces, oil heat. These offered convenience that offset efficiency disadvantages. When fuel is cheap, efficiency matters less. Gregor lived in his tower cabin from 1917 to 1946, 29 years. The structure performed flawlessly throughout that period. The masonry heater never failed. The tower geometry never became less efficient. The design was timeless because it was based on physics, not fashion. In 1946, Gregor sold the property and moved to Missoula to live with his daughter's family. He was 73 years old. The tower cabin remained occupied by subsequent owners for another 20 years. It was finally torn down in 1966 to make room for a larger modern house. But the knowledge survived. The principles were documented. The efficiency was proven. Modern architects and engineers studying energy-efficient building have rediscovered the importance of surface area to volume ratios. Passive house design emphasizes compact form factors. The reason is identical to what Gregor understood. Less surface area means less heat loss. Vertical orientation can be more efficient than horizontal sprawl. The principles are being taught in architecture schools. They're being incorporated into building codes. They're being promoted as sustainable design. All correct, all validated by modern analysis. But Gregor knew it in 1917. Through understanding, experience, and willingness to build differently. One architectural firm in Montana still builds modern versions of tower homes. They call them vertical cabins or compact thermal towers. They use modern materials and insulation, but the geometry is similar to Gregor's design. The firm cites Gregor's original tower as inspiration. They've measured their buildings and confirmed the efficiency gains. Modern materials make the structures even more efficient than Gregor's, but the fundamental advantage comes from the geometry he pioneered. Records of Gregor's tower cabin exist in county archives. Building permits, property records, and tax assessments document the unusual structure. A few photographs taken in the 1930s and 40s show the tower standing tall against the Montana sky. These photos are held by the Montana Historical Society. They're evidence of forgotten innovation. Before we finish, I need you to understand something. If these stories are showing you that innovation isn't about new technology, but about understanding old principles, that efficiency comes from design, not equipment, then you must subscribe to this channel. We're preserving knowledge that most people have forgotten. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you're learning what truly matters. Now let's wrap up with the lessons from Gregor's tower cabin. The story of Gregor's tower cabin teaches several critical lessons about building, heating, and thinking differently. First, geometry matters enormously. The shape of your dwelling determines its thermal efficiency, independent of insulation or heating system. A well-shaped structure with moderate insulation outperforms a poorly shaped structure with excellent insulation. Gregor's tower had less exterior surface for the same interior volume. This geometric efficiency was more valuable than any amount of additional insulation on a conventional cabin. Shape matters first. Everything else is secondary. Second, work with natural processes, not against them. Heat rises. This is unavoidable. Conventional design fights this by trying to force hot air down from ceilings. Gregor embraced it by living where the hot air naturally went. He used gravity and convection as free labor. No energy wasted fighting physics. The result was effortless comfort. Natural processes, properly harnessed, are more efficient than mechanical solutions. Third, thermal mass creates stability and efficiency. The 5 tons of masonry in Gregor's tower stored heat and released it slowly. This buffering eliminated temperature swings and reduced firing frequency. Modern heating systems mostly lack significant thermal mass. They heat on demand. This is responsive but inefficient. You're constantly replacing lost heat rather than storing heat and releasing it gradually. Thermal mass is an ancient solution to a modern problem. Fourth, vertical space is more efficient than horizontal space for thermal reasons. This runs counter to most people's intuition. We think sprawling single-story structures are more practical, but vertically oriented structures have better geometry. Less surface area per volume, natural thermal stratification that can be exploited, easier heat distribution through natural convection. For cold climates, vertical is superior to horizontal. Fifth, measurements trump opinions. Before the cold snap, everyone had opinions about Gregor's tower. They thought it wouldn't work. They predicted failure. But when temperatures were measured, the opinions became irrelevant. Gregor's third floor was 73 degrees. James's cabin was 55 degrees. The difference was quantifiable, measurable, undeniable. No amount of skepticism could argue with thermometers. Measure, don't guess. Sixth, unconventional approaches face resistance until proven, then they face admiration. Gregor was laughed at during construction, called foolish, predicted to fail. After the performance was demonstrated, he was respected, sought after for advice, recognized as knowledgeable, the exact same person doing the exact same thing. Only the perception changed when results proved him right. Innovation requires confidence to persist through the mockery phase until the proof phase. The 47-degree temperature difference between Gregor's tower and conventional cabins is a stunning validation of design principles. That's not a small improvement. That's not a marginal gain. That's a revolutionary difference, nearly 50 degrees warmer, with half the fuel, through nothing but better design. No exotic materials, no expensive technology, just understanding geometry, thermal mass, and natural convection. The economic analysis is compelling. Gregor's $60 additional construction investment saved him 50 cords of wood per year. Over 29 years of occupancy, that's 1,450 cords. At 4 hours of labor per cord, that's 5,800 hours saved. At any reasonable value for time, that's worth tens of thousands of dollars. The return on investment is extraordinary. The tower cabin represents intelligent application of fundamental principles. Physics doesn't change. Thermodynamics doesn't change. These principles worked in 1917. They work today. They'll work 100 years from now. When we forget these principles and build poorly, we waste energy. When we remember and apply them, we achieve efficiency that no amount of technology can match. Gregor's tower was laughed at. The mockers said it was strange, said it was impractical, said it wouldn't work, said he'd freeze. They were wrong about everything. The tower stayed 47 degrees warmer than their cabins. It used half the wood. It provided superior comfort for 3 decades. It proved that understanding geometry and thermal dynamics beats conventional construction. Gregor was right, the laughers were wrong, and the difference was knowledge. Knowledge of surface area to volume ratios, knowledge of thermal stratification, knowledge of masonry thermal mass, knowledge that wasn't new, it was old. Europeans had been building tall, narrow houses for centuries for exactly these efficiency reasons. Gregor brought that knowledge to Montana. He applied it, he proved it. And for 29 years, he lived in comfort while his neighbors burned excessive wood in inefficient cabins. The tower stood as a monument to the power of good design. Everyone laughed at his tower cabin, until it stayed 47 degrees warmer than theirs. Then they stopped laughing and started learning. That's how progress happens. One unconventional structure at a time. One measured result at a time. One converted skeptic at a time. The knowledge spreads, the principles are validated. And maybe, eventually, we stop building poorly and start building well. Gregor showed us how. We just need to remember.